Welcome. We're on the red couch with Jessica Hayes, Director of Community Awareness for SPARCC, Safe Place and Rape Crisis Center. Jessica is focused on primary prevention and attempting to change social norms that support violence in the community. Jessica, I am thrilled to have you on the red couch.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
So my first question is, what exactly is the definition of domestic violence?
Well, it means different things legally than it does at SPARCC. So legally, most people seem to think of domestic violence by that definition, which would be stalking, aggravated assault, and battery. People tend to think of domestic violence in a physical sense of the word.
Right.
At SPARCC, we specifically deal with intimate partner violence, which means that we're addressing violence that happens between partners who are either in a dating relationship, married, or living as a couple. And we look at domestic violence as any unequal balance of power and control in the relationship. So that domestic violence might never be physical, or it might be physical just once. It could be financial abuse, emotional abuse, or a combination of any of those things together.
What's an example of financial abuse?
Something we see often would be, not having control over the money. Maybe this person is working and then she has to turn her paycheck over to her partner as soon as she gets paid, or doesn't have access to funds or resources as needed. So that person is maintaining control over the other through financial resources.
So how can a person start to recognize themselves as a victim of domestic violence? Like, what are the signs?
It's different in every situation. And sometimes it's hard to see it when you're in it. We talk to people who just don't realize that they aren't in a healthy relationship. But really, what we talk about is mutual respect. Do you have equal access to things? Do you share the power in the relationship? Is that person controlling you through some means, whether that be physical, again, or emotional abuse? And do they show you respect? Do you feel like you're in a healthy relationship? Or, usually if you're questioning it, there's a reason that you have that little bit of doubt. And our website, SPARCC, SPARCC.net, has a list of warning signs. But again, you might not identify with all of them. You might identify with one of them. It's different in every case. But if there's a little bit of doubt there, it's good to pay attention to that and look for some resources that might help you figure out, is what you're in just a little bit unhealthy, or is it really an abusive situation?
So let's say you do recognize that you're in an abusive situation.
Mm-hmm.
What steps should you take? Like, what's the first thing you should do, and how do you proceed from there?
Well, I would say talk to someone, looking online. Again, we have a hotline that's 24 hours a day. There's a national domestic violence hotline. Calling and talking to someone, it can be a great thing, because getting some support and talking about resources and what you're going through, because every situation is different and each person might need different things or be looking for different things. Often when we hear about someone that's in a domestic violence situation, from the outside it's easy to say, oh, that person just needs to leave. But that's not usually the first step or the safest step, because it might be a lot more complicated than that, and it usually is.
If someone comes to you, like a friend or
Mm-hmm.
a family member, and they confide in you
Mm-hmm.
that they're, in a bad situation, what's the best way for you to support them?
I would say the most important thing is to express support, to say, I believe you and I support your decision, whatever that decision may be. That can be very difficult to actually live out, because that person might choose to stay with the person that is abusing them. That person might choose to leave and go back multiple times. Again, very common. But supporting them, because each person is an expert in their own lives and in their own relationships. So they know what the safest step for them is. They know what's going to be best for their life. So really, they might be afraid, if they've been emotionally abused, you're not worth anything, things they might be hearing. No one's going to believe you. If you've been torn down emotionally for a really long period of time, it's hard to believe that anyone would believe you, or that you do have value and worth and the ability to make changes on your own. So really supporting that person and saying, I believe you and I'm here for you. And even if you don't agree with what they're doing, try to support them in the ability to make decisions for themselves, because they need to be empowered to make decisions for their own lives instead of leaving one controlling relationship to go to some people that mean well, but again are just controlling the outcomes in a different way.
That's a good point. I like what you said about saying that you believe them. I mean, is it common to not believe someone? You know, I think it's interesting because you mentioned it twice to make sure you say that you believe them.
Right. Well, at SPARCC, we deal with sexual assault and domestic violence. I would say it's a lot more common with sexual violence for people to not believe them or to doubt them. But with domestic violence, I think it's easy to minimize it. And people, again, it's not something that people intentionally do.
Right.
But it makes people uncomfortable to think about abuse and unhealthy relationships, and people feel like they're meddling. It's, you know, the reason that domestic violence has been a private issue for so long and been so difficult for people to come out of is that people don't want to meddle in other people's business. So, you know, it can be easy to minimize, and you might not see that side of the other person. So you might say, well, are you sure that it's as bad as you say that it is? Or just little things to express doubt that mean a lot more to the person that's hearing it than you might realize. So expressing belief and strength and support is just really important because, again, any small piece of doubt that they hear in your voice might translate to be much bigger to them.
So what if you, instead of having someone come and confide in you, what if they don't confide in you, excuse me, but you suspect that their relationship is in some sort of difficult, abusive pattern?
Right.
Do you approach them and say that you're worried for them? Or do you, like what you were saying, keep it their private situation and don't get involved?
That's a tough one. I would say that it's okay to ask, are you safe? You know, you can say things without being accusing, because I think that as much as someone might be abused, they are being abused by someone that they probably love very much, and at one point had the perception that that person loved them very much. So attacking the other person is not going to probably be very effective. Just saying things like, are you safe at home? Are things okay? I'm concerned about you. I've seen some changes. A lot of times with domestic violence, one of the tactics that an abuser will use is to isolate their victim. So, you know, telling them, I don't want you to hang out with those people. Your family is controlling. We shouldn't be around them. You see that person suddenly pulls away from family, friends, all of these different support systems, and they don't have that support anymore because their abuser has slowly pulled them out of all of those systems. So, you know, saying things like, are you doing okay? And is there anything I can do to help you? How can I support you? And mentioning things that you're seeing in them, making it about your perceptions and them and not about attacking or accusing or making them feel judged.
Right. That's good. So why is it so hard? Like you were saying, oftentimes people go back again and again to an abusive situation, multiple times. What are some of the reasons that it's so hard to leave?
There are so many factors, and I didn't even begin to realize it until I worked at SPARCC, and now that I've been there several years. You know, if a couple has children together and they don't have financial resources, that's a huge reason to go back, because being a mother myself, I've seen it. You know, someone comes in and their partner's been arrested the night before. Well, now that partner isn't going to be able to work. And if that was their source of income, and now they don't know how they're going to get food or diapers. You know, a lot of times someone can say, I can handle being abused myself if I know that my children are going to be provided for, because the alternative sometimes can be, we're going to be homeless. We're not going to be able to buy formula. How am I going to feed my kids? So those are very real fears if they haven't worked in some amount of time, you know, and then especially if you have small children and you don't have childcare, those are huge obstacles. And again, sometimes you can't see the forest through the trees. So you're just seeing the immediate mountains right in front of you of how am I going to get through this, and not realizing that there's a network of resources and places like SPARCC that can connect you with those resources and help you to make a plan. So that's one of the things that we do at SPARCC, is we help kind of organize the chaos. We try to be a place of calm in the middle of a storm, because when people come to us, they're usually in crisis. So we try to help them to make a plan for themselves, to identify their priorities and their needs, and figure out what steps that they can take to meet those needs one at a time, so that it becomes less intimidating and overwhelming.
So how does a woman, I'm saying woman, I know that domestic violence can be
Yes.
either, but how does a woman heal? Like what are the stages of healing? How likely is it, and how does it happen?
It's different for everyone. And I know that's a difficult answer, but with trauma affects people differently. So some people might react to trauma by withdrawing or going into depression. Some people get hyperproductive, and they seem to be actually unaffected by what they've been through until they reach a period. We've had people that we've worked with who seem to be fine, and there might be something at some certain time of the year that is triggering.
Right.
They might not even be identifying it, but there's a certain time of the year where they do some things that might be kind of destructive to what the progress that they've made, not realizing that it goes back to something they've experienced years ago. So the healing process is different for everyone, but what we try to help people realize is that there's great courage within, there's great resiliency. Just because you have been victimized doesn't mean that you're defined by that. We try to help people to see that you're not a victim, you're a survivor, and you can move on from this and help other survivors, or defining themselves differently, looking at it that way.
What's an example of a survivor?
Oh, we have some amazing survivors. One of the difficult things at SPARCC, a lot of times people say, well, we want to talk to someone who's come out of this. And the hard part for us is we see people a lot of times right in the middle of their crisis. So we're seeing them at their worst, when they are literally in our shelter, homeless, don't have resources or a job. And sometimes we don't see the end of the story. But luckily we do have people that we have been able to kind of see the end of the story, or the next step of the story. One of our advocates the other day bought flowers for someone who was graduating from nursing school. Really exciting for her, because she had made some huge changes and had some big educational goals, and she was really moving towards that self-sufficiency. We've got others who have come back now and volunteered or organized fundraisers for us. And now that I've been there almost 7 years, I've seen the full circle. It was somebody who might have been in our program years ago, and now she has gone on, gotten education or a new job. It's not always what we think of as, sometimes we think, well, they never contact their abuser again. And sometimes when they're shared children, they'll talk about the struggle of, they still have to see that person and communicate with that person because they share custody. But one woman I talked to a few months ago talked about how she still relies on her, some of her family at SPARCC to help her through some of that and some of the stuff she learned. So we've just got amazing women who, a couple of women who've come back and worked at SPARCC in the shelter. Wow. After having been in the shelter. We have, again, people who are meeting educational goals, who are out there just seeing success in their lives and their children's lives, and are able to then reach out and touch other people through that. So it's exciting.
So exciting.
Yeah, it is.
So tell me a little bit about the safe place, about how long can you stay there? What are the boundaries there?
It's about 6 weeks. It's not meant to be a long-term program. It's kind of an emergency shelter is really how we define it. It's really exciting because in the last couple of months, we've built a kennel as part of the shelter, because victims of domestic violence are also experiencing animal abuse in their homes, and that can be a tactic that a batterer would use and say, well, if you leave, I'm going to kill your cat, or I'm going to hurt the dog. And pets are part of the family. So previously we had to work with kennels that may or may not be close, and it's just another layer of difficulty that survivors were facing when they were coming into shelter. So now we have a kennel where someone can bring their dog or cat with them. And the shelter it's a really wonderful place. It's designed to bring the outside in. There's a ton of windows in the shelter. It's a very light and bright place. There's a courtyard where the kids can play safely, and it's designed so that we have families on one side of the building, and women or men who don't have children wouldn't necessarily be sharing the same living room, because I always joke that when you have small children, not everybody wants to watch cartoons. So there's a good balance of being able to provide space for whatever someone's lifestyle needs might be. And like I said, I speak a lot when I'm talking about domestic violence in terms of women and children, because the majority of those that we see at SPARCC are women and children. I think about 85% of our program participants are, but domestic violence does affect men, and we do provide shelter services, and all of our programs and services are for men as well. So it certainly affects everybody. Yeah.
So what are some of the social norms that seem to support violence against women in particular, since you're saying that is the majority?
Yeah, we do a lot of work in primary prevention. Our goal at SPARCC is to not only help those that are currently affected by domestic violence and sexual assault, but also to prevent anyone in the future from becoming a perpetrator or a victim at that first time. So we work with young people as young as 4th grade, talking about healthy relationships and social norms. And at some of the younger ages, we're not talking about dating or violence. We're talking about, what does it mean to be a girl and what does it mean to be a boy? Because a lot of times what we're learning is that to be a male, it means that you have to be aggressive and rough or tough, and to be a girl, it means that you need to be kind, and if you're assertive at all, then that's a negative thing. So we talk about, can girls play football? Things that seem silly, but really they're at the root of these things that we grow up with, and then beliefs that are reinforced in the media, the television shows that we're watching, and in the music that we're listening to. So really talking about some of those things, teaching young people to look critically at the media and to really be aware of what it is that they're hearing, looking at pop culture stories, because there's a lot of it that you don't start really putting it together until you're more involved with domestic violence, and you're like, wow, it's all around us. We just don't always call it domestic violence. Even when you read the paper, a lot of times stories that are domestic violence aren't reported using those words, so you just think, it's crime, but it's a lot of times domestic violence is at the root. So
the conversations that we should be having are conversations about, I'm putting words into your mouth, but the media, the music we're listening to, and what's being said to kind of...
Yeah, and about equality, about respect, about sharing power in relationships, and respecting other people, and what is a healthy relationship? Again, looking at not just violence as far as a physical sense of violence, but are you, is it shared power in that is one person controlling you, being overly jealous over, in those teen relationships? Because a lot of times if someone has never seen a healthy relationship modeled in their home, they don't know what to look for. So it's one thing to go in and say, well, this is bad, but if we don't talk about what's good, they don't necessarily know what to look for in a healthy relationship. So really, it's a huge, when I first started and they talked about changing social norms, I was like, I don't know that that's going to ever be possible. But it really is, because you look at social change in the form of recycling. I know it's not as serious of an issue necessarily when you're talking about domestic violence and recycling, but if you would have talked about recycling 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't a priority. And now, wearing seatbelts. Again, those things are all social change that have happened in the last 50 years. And so when we talk about social change for domestic violence, it is possible to move in that direction. And we've already come a long way.
So what is, in a brief synopsis, the definition of a healthy relationship?
That's a tough one. I would say...
Not that any relationship is perfect.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, no relationship's perfect, but when there is mutual respect and shared power, I think that that's a really good basis for a healthy relationship. When there is, each person's decisions and opinions are respected and listened to, and one person doesn't have more power over the other person. We talk a lot about power and control because that's the root of domestic violence. It's not about anger issues. It's not about alcohol or drugs, although those things are triggers to make a bad situation worse.
Right.
Domestic violence at the root of it is about power and control.
Right.
So,
I like on your website you say that a violence-free society is attainable. So how can we all contribute to making that happen?
I think having conversations like this is a really big part of it, because I meet people in the community constantly who initially will say, oh, what you do is amazing at SPARCC. I don't know anybody who's been sexually assaulted or experienced domestic violence. And then it's like, as we talk 10 minutes into the conversation, they're saying, wait a minute, my sister was in an abusive relationship. They're not identifying it necessarily right away as domestic violence because it might not have had that violent episode where there was a restraining order or law enforcement or something like that. But they, because domestic violence, depending on the level of resources you have access to or the support system you have access to, it affects people differently. Some people can leave a relationship quietly, not make it a public thing that it was abusive, and move on, while other people don't have as many resources or support system, and it does get to a more desperate situation where they have to get a lot more help. So I'm digressing, but it is attainable. Having conversations about domestic violence, bringing it out of the shadows, bringing it out of it being a private issue, and talking about how it's okay. There's nothing wrong with you if you experience abuse. It's not your fault. It's really important for people to hear because they feel embarrassed and ashamed. And I talk to survivors who say, I'm embarrassed that I let this happen to me. And something we always tell them is, you are not to blame. You didn't cause this. That person chose to take those actions. So talking about that, and even calling out sexist jokes, those things again are at the root. They're not overtly domestic violence. It's not one of those violent behaviors, but saying, that's not okay, that's not funny, instead of just being passive about it. It's
so
important.
Noticing all the different ways we all contribute on some levels sometimes to the what we don't want to happen, and then ways to contribute to what we do want to see happen in the world.
Yes.
Well, I'm curious, if you had a secret to living a happy and successful life, what would it be?
Personally, I really believe in expecting the best out of everything. And I would say, as it relates to our work at SPARCC, expecting the best and believing in yourself, because we have a lot of power within. And if you believe in yourself, I do believe you can do anything.
Thank you so much for what you're doing and how you're contributing to making this world a much better place.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you for joining us
on the Red Couch.
The sweetest thing that you ever